Welcome back to the Pig Trail Show and to our Hog Hoops Report. As always, we are joined by our basketball insider, Kevin Mcpherson. Kevin, this is the tough start to the week now, or I guess end of the week for Arkansas. Not many people expected them to fall to Hofstra 89-81. We're starting to see some weaknesses in this team. What do you see? What was the problem last night in that loss?
Well, first of all, we actually started seeing these problems in the first exhibition game against a Division II team when Arkansas trailed by double digits and was trailing by a point in the final minute of that game. And it just continues to manifest win or lose. Now it's starting to manifest in losses. And I think, as long as you're winning, you can live with some of the problem areas. Once you start losing and there's like a kind of a rinse and recycle, it's the same kind of stuff that's dogging Arkansas. And what's interesting last night is, Arkansas has been a very poor defensive team when you talk about defending the 3-point shot. They've not been good on offense shooting the three, so that combination's been problematic. They've had some other trouble areas, specifically being consistent, taking care of the ball, sharing the ball, and having flow. I have felt like this team has been mostly disconnected at both ends of the floor for the season. So win or lose, that permeates. And I think at some point, you can tell when a team has good chemistry when the pieces are not just individual pieces, but they're working together. You've got to have longer stretches of game with harmony amongst what you see on the floor. And I think Arkansas has so many possessions where there's disconnect, so they might get on a run for a while, but then they'll have just a string of bad plays, whether it's turnovers, getting a bad shot because you didn't move the ball, having defensive breakdowns. And so those things start to snowball. So that's what I saw last night against Hofstra. It's what I saw against Oklahoma a few days ago. And frankly, it's what I've seen too much of, even when Arkansas got out to a 9-0 start. Now the SEC, the big bad SEC, which is a good league, it's one of the best in the country. That's always true for football, but it's really gotten that way in basketball. And that's an 18-game schedule. You don't have a night off. But couple of things about Hofstra. That team came in with two close call losses against ranked teams in November, had chances to win a couple of games, so you knew they were for real. And then they had a former Razorback, Baby Iliola, who had a cup of coffee. He was at Arkansas for 2 years, and I think played a minute against South Carolina, a road game last year, because he'd been battling a knee injury in his second year. He had to sit out the first year as a redshirt, but he puts a double-double on Arkansas. But if you really look at what happened in that game, the guards for Hofstra were basically playing chess, and it looked to me like Arkansas's backcourt too often was playing checkers. Their guys pick and chose. They were a really good three-point shooting team. They start off hot there. Arkansas managed to hold them to 7 of 22, which means Arkansas probably did a better job of starting to defend the three line, but their guards didn't force shots from three. They broke Arkansas's defense down, got into the paint, fed Bebe Iliola for some easy looks, got into the mid range, got all the way to the basket. And if you look at Arkansas, when I talk about their weaknesses, being a poor being a poor 3-point defensive team, and being a poor 3-point shooting offense, what Arkansas did do was control the glass most of the season, get putbacks, and get to the free throw line and win those blue collar battles. That didn't happen last night either. Arkansas was minus 12 in points off turnovers. So when you're scrapping for the ball, getting live ball turnovers, converting those, Hofstra scored 22 points. Arkansas got 10. Arkansas has been dominating teams in points in the paint. They got dominated last night, minus 18, 44-26. And even we talked about the rebounding and putbacks. 2 games in a row now, Arkansas has only gotten 6 second chance points in each game. And so when you're not a good team in other areas, you've got to win those blue collar battles. In Arkansas, where they were winning those, despite how disconnected they looked, sometimes it just turned into a scrap, and they won a lot of those battles individually, play by play through a game. Now they're losing a lot of those. So I think, I'm not saying that this team's going backward, but I think the competition level, if you look at the teams that Arkansas's played that might give them a battle, Kansas State, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, and Hofstra, those are the 4 toughest teams. If you look at it just from NCAA net, Arkansas has not looked like, a team that's cohesive for long stretches, not consistently. Even really good teams have bad stretches, but Arkansas seems to be those kind of possessions and both ends of the court type of play where it's disconnected seems to be prevailing. And so I think it's going to be a struggle for Arkansas. It's a tight 6 to 7 man rotation that Mosman likes to play. And I feel like uh, if he's not going to expand the rotation, maybe look at some different personnel options in the rotation. I've said for a while that I think the two Robinsons, KK and Jackson, could bring a different dynamic to this team. And I'm not saying those guys are saviors, but at the same time, sometimes you don't need a savior. You just need to change things up a little bit and get different diversity of play into the system because they got a lot of guys that like to dribble the ball and hunt for offense that way. The ball stops moving. It's easier for defenses to play against that kind of basketball. And I think that's why Arkansas gets hung up in bad stretches of games where they can't get over the hump. And look, when the net came out today, Arkansas at 9-2 has dropped down to number 90. Hofstra moved up to number 92. And I'm not so sure, based on what I saw last night, that those places should be swapped because Hofstra was the better team. Oklahoma a few days ago was the better team. Having said all of that, Arkansas hasn't gotten an SEC play yet. They get Elon on
Mhm.
Tuesday. That's a quick turnaround. That's a 3-9 team. You can't take anything for granted that this Arkansas team is going to go out and take care of business and look good doing it. But they should win that game. And then they've got 8 days to get ready for their SEC opener at Mississippi State. That's a road game, and Mississippi State's in the top 50 in that. They're a good team.
Now,
But Arkansas can get the ship righted and get things going in the right direction. But right now, it looks like it's going in the wrong direction. First back-to-back losses, by the way, in non-conference for Eric Musselman since he's been at Arkansas, and first back-to-back losses since mid-January last year when Arkansas went on the road and lost at LSU and at Alabama.
now, is it time to you mentioned Elon? Is it time to kind of hit the panic button? What does this team have to do to turn this around?
Yeah, I don't think it's time to hit the panic button, but I think everybody's accountable. I don't think it's just players. We could talk about the individual players and their weaknesses. I think it's also the coaching staff. I'm not going to sit here and say I know more than Eric Musselman, but I've seen enough of what's played out to know that there might be some other pieces to the puzzle that you've got on your roster that you're not giving a long enough look to. And we saw it last year. Arkansas got out 2-4 in the SEC and got hammered. They didn't just magically get better. He changed the rotations in the minutes. Guys like Devo Davis and Jalen Williams got opportunities and took those opportunities, ran with them, and they injected themselves at that point into that top 6-7 rotation. Prior to that, they weren't in it. And so I think, something like that might have to play out. And Eric Musselman, it's his team. It's his vision. He's going to do it the way he wants to do it. And I'm not going to second guess when I look back at the arc of his 6 years prior in college basketball, whether it was Nevada and the first two at Arkansas, because he's won at a high level. And I think that, Arkansas's got every piece on it. They've got every piece on their roster to have a successful season and still be a very good basketball team and make the NCAA tournament. But right now, those pieces are not fitting together. The word together. Musselman's talked about lack of leadership. He's talked about, maybe guys not buying in to roles. Arkansas had a lot of good fortune with guys like Jalen Tate and Justin Smith, newcomers, but veterans. But their veterans this year, they haven't clicked and meshed that he brought in through that transfer portal. And so just because it worked last year doesn't mean that it'll work this year. And conversely, the way that it worked out last year doesn't mean it's going to work out that way this year, but they could still
Right.
find the right buttons to push. It may not look like it did last year. They may play a lot of ugly basketball and be a lot of games, but you want to be closer than they were against Oklahoma. And even Hofstra held a double-digit lead for large sections of that second half. And late in the game, Arkansas would close and make mistakes. Hofstra is a good basketball team. They took advantage, built that lead back up to 10. Then it got to 12. So, you want to be closer. If you're going to play ugly basketball, you need to be closer at the end and give yourself a chance to win.
And you mentioned the start last year in SEC play, 2-4, sort of rough outing for them to get going, but then they went on a little bit of a run. This SEC conference looks a lot better than it did last year too. Alabama's still very good. Kentucky is back to where they've been. Auburn is up in the top 25. Um, Arkansas approaching that SEC schedule. How do you find this league? How will it shape Arkansas? What does Arkansas is what are they going up against in the SEC, and what do they have to do outside of non-conference play now? Because they always say, right, the SEC is or your conference schedule is when the real season starts. So it starts what you said 8 days for Arkansas. Are you worried at all about the non-conference or the conference schedule for the Razorbacks?
Absolutely, because this is a very good basketball league, and you don't have a night off. Every night you've got to bring it, and you're going to have Arkansas's got an excellent X's and O's coach, but these other teams do too. You look at what Hofstra did. Hofstra said, "Okay, run us off the 3 line. We're going to beat you in other ways. We've scouted you. We know what your weaknesses are." People talked about Hofstra's 3-point shooting, but it was 6th in the country in assisted turnovers, 17 assists a game to 11 turnovers. They hit that last night. That was the exact ratio they found. And they got Arkansas turned over 15 times and they won that turnover battle. So you asked about conference play. If you look at Hofstra and the way they played that game, do you think it's going to be any easier when you get into SEC play? Of course not. And so Arkansas has got to fix what's in house before really. And Musman's talked about that. He said last week after the Oklahoma game, they spent the first 2 days of practice, Monday and Tuesday, just worrying about themselves before really getting into the opponent. And so if you're constantly doing that, I think that's problematic. I think there is a reason to be worried going into conference play because all of these coaches are worthy of being at this level. They recruit that way. The SEC's never had a problem with recruiting. And I think Arkansas is in for some rough nights still. But I think they're also in with the possibility of having success in this league and being worthy at the end of the season of being in the NCAA tournament and possibly a ranked team again. They're 24th as we speak, but when the next polls come out, they're out of the polls. That's okay.
Right. Yeah.
It's all about what you do on the court. You worry about that stuff later. And I think Arkansas's got the pieces, but they're not individual pieces are not. I've seen it so many times in not just basketball, but other sports where you have a lot of talent and you can see the talent or you can see how things might work. But if it doesn't gel and doesn't come together, and you're missing key ingredients like leadership, having a floor leader is important. Doesn't have to be a true point guard, but someone to run the team. Having diversity in what guys can do. Arkansas's got too many guys that are creating off the bounce. They need a catch and shoot guy, just like an Isaiah. Not everybody's going to be an Isaiah Joe or Moses Moody, but if you've got a guy that doesn't have to dribble a lot to create a shot, then maybe he can complement the guys that play that way. But you got to be on the floor to help. And so, those are just a few examples, Nick. But I think Arkansas still got to fix things within before it can even prepare, competently for these other teams. Because if you've just got so many shortcomings in some of these areas, you can game plan all you want for other teams, but those teams are game planning too, and they know your weaknesses. They're going to exploit those. In the last 2 games, I have felt like as much as it's been about Arkansas's dysfunction at times, other teams have seen enough of that on tape to really attack it.
Now let's look.
So
Yeah, they have
we've got 2
Elon.
losses as a result.
Yeah, non-conference. They wrap up with Elon December 21st. Then the next 3 games in their non-conference schedule to start. Mississippi State Wednesday, December 29th. That's on the road. They're back home against Vanderbilt on January 4th, and then they take to the road against Texas A&M on January 8th. So that's your first 3 slates in SEC play. So while we're a little worried about this team this year and how they're going to mesh, give credit where credit's due. We talk a lot about recruiting on this segment, and very few teams have done it better than Eric Musselman and Arkansas. And you were in North Little Rock catching up with and watching a future target for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, so the Razorbacks played in Central Arkansas, and when they do that, the team comes down the day before Friday. The Musselman was the guest speaker, the featured guest speaker. This is tradition at the Downtown Tip-Off Club. Each season, it's the opening meeting of that. So he was already in town. So Friday night, Little Rock Central hosted Bentonville in a high school game, and Little Rock Central has 2024 Arkansas for K. Hunter Boateng, a 6'5" wing, one of the most talented players in the country. When you look at that 6'5", he's well put together, strong, super athletic, super quick. And he's starting to build around that with skill. And so far early in the season, he's been so impressive. And he put on a show in front of Eric Musselman and assistant coach Gus Argent Friday night. Bentonville's a good team. That's one of the top teams in 6A. And Little Rock Central had a lead, then fell behind, but a big come from behind win in the fourth quarter. And Boateng had 20 points, very efficient shooting the ball, good at the free throw line. 13 big rebounds. He had at least half of those in that fourth quarter, attacking the rim in that comeback. And then he had 4 assists, 4 steals, and a block. So he does a little bit of everything. But when you look at the athletic talent and the strength, And then you start putting it together with some of the skill stuff he's doing. And I got video of some of that, put it out on Twitter. It's quite impressive. And here's another young man. We talk about the depth of talent in the state of Arkansas. And every year you've got guys that are not only high major guys, but potential for NBA down the line. We're seeing that. We're seeing it play out. This is one of those guys to keep an eye on. And Eric Musselman and Gus Argenal, I think they spent their Friday night wisely by going to that game to get their eyes on K on our boat team.
Will be one to keep watch for. We know you'll be the one to talk to about it, and you can follow Kevin along at AR Hoop Scoop on Twitter. Um, Kevin, thank you so much. We'll be back here on next Sunday in our Hog Hoops report to see if anything has changed in that Elon game on Tuesday. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. More Pig Trail Show coming up after the break.